Welcome to another deep dive, this time into the world of information design. And we're going to be looking at a classic, seminal work, even in this field,
He really is.
The Visual Display of Quantitative Information
Yeah.
by Edward Tufte.
Yeah.
And we really want to understand this stuff quickly and thoroughly, and I think that this book is the shortcut to doing just that.
It is.
So we're going to be talking about all sorts of fascinating examples.
Yeah.
Like a historical map that helped crack a disease outbreak, and the tricks behind misleading visuals,
Okay.
and then the simple elegance of good design.
Tough work is foundational. He's really changed how we think about presenting data, in a way that's both clear and compelling.
So let's jump right in.
Oh,
I mean, for someone like me who's fascinated by visuals, but not really a data expert,
right.
what exactly is information design?
Yeah.
And what makes it different from just making things look pretty?
That's a great question. Information design is about communicating data visually with clarity and efficiency. It's like a visual language for understanding complex information,
Yeah.
revealing patterns and trends that might be hidden in raw numbers alone.
Well,
And Tufte, with his background as a professor at Yale with expertise in statistics and design,
oh, wow.
is a master of this language.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Can you give me like a real-world example of how powerful this can be?
absolutely. Think about the 1854 cholera outbreak in London.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. John Snow, using what we now consider information design, created a map that quite literally changed how we understand disease.
I've heard of that map.
Right.
It's pretty simple, right?
Yeah.
Just dots on a map.
It was snow plotted each cholera death as a dot on a map of the city.
Right.
And what emerged was a cluster of deaths centered around a specific water pump on Broad Street.
Wow.
And this visualization made the invisible visible.
Yeah.
A contaminated water pump was the source of the outbreak.
Wow.
That discovery revolutionized public health.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think that a simple visual could have such a huge impact.
Yeah.
It really highlights how information design can reveal truths that might otherwise stay hidden.
Right.
Tufte calls this graphical excellence, right?
He does.
Graphical excellence.
Yeah, graphical excellence is about achieving clarity, precision, and efficiency in your visuals.
Okay.
It's about maximizing what Tufte calls the data ink ratio.
Data ink ratio.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds a bit technical.
Sure.
Break it down for me.
Think of it this way. Every drop of ink on your visual should contribute directly to communicating the data.
Okay.
No wasted ink, no unnecessary clutter. It's about getting to the heart of the information quickly,
Right.
which is what you're looking for, right?
Absolutely. I'm all about efficiency.
Okay, great.
Can you give me an example of how this works in practice?
Tufte uses the example of an electroencephalogram reading in a medical textbook.
Okay.
The original graphic is cluttered with thick lines and a busy background grid.
Yeah.
Tufte redesigns it, slimming down the data lines and removing the grid. The result is a much clearer, more efficient visual where the data itself takes center stage.
Right.
It's a great example of how eliminating unnecessary ink can dramatically improve comprehension.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So we've got this idea of maximizing the information in every drop of ink.
Yeah.
But is there a risk that this clarity could be used to mislead people? Can you lie with data visualization?
Unfortunately, yes. Even with the best intentions, visuals can distort the truth.
Okay.
That's where graphical integrity comes in. It's about ensuring that your visuals accurately represent the data
Right.
and don't lead viewers to false conclusions.
I'm really interested in this idea of deception.
Okay.
Can you give me a concrete example of how a visual can be misleading?
Take a look at this newspaper chart depicting new fuel economy standards set by Congress.
Okay.
At first glance, it looks like there were massive improvements.
Yeah.
But if you look closer, you'll see that the visual was designed to exaggerate those improvements. Tufte even gives us a way to calculate the lie factor, to see just how much the graphic is distorting the truth.
Lie factor. That sounds intense.
It is.
How do you calculate that?
In this case, the lie factor turns out to be 1.53.
Okay.
That means the visual exaggerated the improvement in fuel standards by a whopping 53%.
Wow. That's a pretty significant distortion.
It is.
Clearly, we need to be careful about taking visuals at face value.
Yeah,
How can we avoid falling into these traps?
right.
Does Tufte offer any guidance on spotting these deceptions?
He does. He outlines 6 principles of graphical integrity to help us analyze and evaluate data visualizations.
Okay.
making sure they're representing the data, honestly.
Okay, let's dive into those principles.
Okay.
What's the first one?
The first principle states that the representation of numbers as measured on the graphic
Okay.
should be directly proportional to the numerical quantities represented. In
Got it.
other words, the size of a bar or a line
Right.
should accurately reflect the data it's representing. No sneaky scaling tricks.
That seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
What's the next principle?
The second principle emphasizes clear and thorough labeling.
Right.
Labels should be detailed enough to defeat any potential for distortion or ambiguity.
Mm-hmm.
Never leave your audience guessing what your visual is truly showing.
So no hiding information in tiny, unreadable fonts. Got it.
Exactly.
What's next?
The third principle is about focusing on the data, not flashy design.
Okay.
The design shouldn't overshadow or distort the actual variations in the data itself.
Okay.
Keep it clean and let the data speak for itself.
So no unnecessary bells and whistles.
Exactly.
What about principle number 4?
The fourth principle gets a bit more specific. When displaying money over time,
Okay.
it's almost always better to use units that are adjusted for inflation.
Right.
This ensures you're showing a true picture of changes, not just changes caused by inflation.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's all about providing context, right?
It is.
What's the 5th principle?
The fifth principle warns against trying to cram too much information into a single visual.
Okay.
The number of dimensions depicted should match the dimensions of the data itself.
Right.
Don't overload your audience or create unnecessary visual complexity.
Less is more.
Yes.
What about the final principle?
The sixth and final principle emphasizes providing context.
Okay.
Never quote data out of context.
Oh, okay.
Your visual should tell a complete and accurate story.
These principles are really helpful. They provide a framework for analyzing visuals
Right.
and making sure they're not misleading us.
Exactly.
It sounds like Tufte is a big advocate for clarity
He is.
and cutting through the clutter.
Yes.
Speaking of clutter,
Yeah.
what about all those unnecessary elements we see in some visuals? The chart junk, as Tufte calls it.
Chart junk, the nemesis of clear communication. It's
Yeah.
anything that clutters up a graphic
Yeah.
and distracts from the data, hindering understanding.
Yeah.
Think unnecessary decorations, confusing backgrounds, or excessive 3D effects.
Right. I've definitely seen charts that are more about looking flashy
Mm-hmm.
than actually conveying information effectively.
Yes.
Can you give me an example of chart junk gone wrong?
Take a look at this example from the Journal of the American Statistical Association.
Okay.
The background grid pattern creates a moire effect that makes it incredibly difficult to see the data lines.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of how unnecessary ink can actually hinder comprehension.
That's a great example of how chart junk can actually create visual confusion.
Yes.
It seems like Tufte is advocating for a more minimalist approach, right?
Yeah.
Less is more.
Exactly. Tufte argues for elegance and simplicity in design.
Right.
He believes that effective design often lies in reducing unnecessary elements, allowing the essential information to shine through.
That resonates with me.
Good.
It reminds me of the evolution of design in general.
Yeah.
We've moved from ornate Victorian styles
Right.
to the sleek, minimalist designs we see today.
Mm.
Is there a connection there?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That same principle applies to information design. Think of architecture. We went from gingerbread-trimmed Victorian houses
Right.
to the clean lines of modern buildings.
Right.
In information design, beauty often lies in stripping away the unnecessary,
Okay.
achieving a balance between visual appeal and information richness.
Right.
Tufte calls for multifunctioning graphical elements,
Yeah.
where each part of the visual serves multiple purposes in conveying information.
Multifunctioning graphical elements.
Yes.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of this in action?
Let's look at Colonel Leonard P. Ayer's visualization of American divisions in World War I.
Okay.
This graphic elegantly encodes 3 variables: the date, location, and size of each division,
Okay.
using just a single line.
Wow.
It's a beautiful example of how a well-designed visual can reveal multiple layers of information simultaneously,
Yeah.
creating a true aha moment for the viewer.
Right.
And for someone like you who loves those aha moments,
I do.
this is where information design really shines.
That's incredible.
Mm.
I'm starting to see how these principles can be used to create truly powerful visuals.
Mm-hmm.
It's about more than just charts and graphs.
Right.
It's about telling a story with data.
Exactly. And that's just the beginning. There's so much more to explore in the world of information design.
I'm excited.
Good.
Let's keep going.
Okay.
It strikes me that this idea of multifunctioning elements, like ties back to what we were talking about earlier, that data ink ratio.
Yeah.
By making each element do more work, you're naturally eliminating that unnecessary clutter.
You're absolutely right. It's like a visual version of writing concisely.
Right.
Every word, or in this case, every visual element needs to pull its weight.
Right.
And that efficiency is especially important in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information.
Yeah, speaking of information overload,
Mm-hmm.
is there a way to present like a lot of data
Mm-hmm.
without overwhelming the viewer? I'm thinking of those huge complex charts you sometimes see
Right.
that are just impossible to decipher.
That's where a concept called small multiples comes in.
Small multiples.
Yeah, it's a technique that Tufte champions for elegantly handling large data sets.
Okay.
Imagine a series of similar graphics, each showing the same variables, but with a slight change,
Okay.
like a different point in time or a different category.
Yeah.
Think of it like frames in a movie.
Okay. I'm starting to visualize it.
Good.
Each frame shows the same scene, but from a slightly different perspective, so you can see how things change over time.
Exactly. It's a dynamic and engaging way to track changes without creating a giant, overwhelming graphic.
Right.
And it's a technique that can be applied to a wide range of topics.
Can you give me a real-world example of how small multiples work?
Tufte uses the example of tracking air pollution levels in Los Angeles over a 24-hour period.
Okay.
Each frame represents a different hour, and you can see how the pollution levels rise and fall throughout the day.
Yeah.
It's a much more compelling way to visualize this data than a single static chart.
That sounds really effective. And I imagine that using small multiples helps cut down on chart junk too, right?
You got it.
Since each frame uses the same basic design, you don't need to repeat labels and axes over and over.
It's all about efficiency. You're eliminating redundancy and freeing up space for more data.
Right.
And that ties into another one of Tufte's principles, the shrinking principle.
Shrinking principle.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
It's the idea that many graphics can be reduced in size without sacrificing clarity or information.
Okay.
Tufte shows an example from a French book on semiology where he shrinks a large graphic,
Right.
eliminating unnecessary white space and using smaller labels.
Okay.
The result is a much more compact and readable visual.
I love that. It's a great reminder that we shouldn't be afraid to experiment with size and scale.
Yeah,
Sometimes making things smaller can actually improve their impact.
right.
Like that saying less is more.
Exactly. It's about being thoughtful and intentional with every element of your design. And that brings us back to the heart of what Tufte is advocating for. Good design isn't just about aesthetics. It's about making information accessible and understandable.
Right.
It's about empowering viewers to see the world in new ways and to discover insights that might otherwise remain hidden.
You know, as we've been talking about all these principles,
Yeah.
I've been thinking about how they apply beyond just charts and graphs.
Hmm.
These ideas seem relevant to any type of communication where we're trying to convey complex information clearly.
I completely agree. Think about presentations reports, even emails.
Yeah.
These same principles of clarity, efficiency, and integrity can help us communicate more effectively in all sorts of contexts.
It's all about making sure your message comes through loud and clear.
Right.
And sometimes a well-chosen visual can be far more powerful than a wall of text.
Absolutely. Visuals can cut through the noise, highlight key points,
Right.
and make information more memorable.
It's funny how we often associate, design with like making things pretty, but in the realm of information design, it seems like beauty and function are completely intertwined.
They are. Tufte makes a strong case for simplicity being the ultimate sophistication
Okay.
in visual communication.
Mm-hmm.
The most effective designs are often those that strip away the extraneous
Right.
and focus on the essential information.
It reminds me of that quote, perfection is achieved not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away.
Yeah.
It seems to apply perfectly to what we're discussing.
It does. A well-designed graphic should be like a well-crafted sentence.
Right.
Concise, elegant, and easy to understand.
Yeah.
And that ties into another interesting point Tufte makes about the concept of data density.
Data density, I'm intrigued.
Okay.
Tell me more.
Data density is a measure of how much information is packed into a given space.
Okay.
It's a crucial concept because it speaks to the efficiency of a visual display.
Right.
And it turns out our eyes are remarkably good at processing dense information.
So we can handle a lot of information in a small space.
Right.
As long as it's presented effectively.
Exactly. Tufte points out that we can easily distinguish hundreds of tiny dots within a small area.
Okay.
That's why techniques like scatter plots and dot maps can be so effective.
Right.
They allow us to visualize large data sets in a compact and meaningful way.
I'm starting to see how all these principles connect.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
maximizing information while minimizing clutter, creating a visual that's both efficient and engaging.
Precisely. And that's what makes information design so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's about finding that sweet spot where beauty and functionality intersect, where a visual is not only informative, but also aesthetically pleasing.
It sounds like Tough Day believes that a good visual should do more than just convey data.
Right.
It should tell a story.
He does. He talks about the importance of narrative in visual displays.
Yeah.
A good graphic should draw the viewer in and lead them to a deeper understanding of the data. It's about creating a sense of discovery and insight, not just presenting a bunch of numbers.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive.
Good.
It's amazing to see how these principles can be applied not only to complex scientific data, but also to everyday communication. I know I'll never look at a chart or graph the same way again.
That's wonderful to hear. And remember, these principles can be applied to all sorts of visual communication.
Right.
Presentations, reports, even just simple emails.
Right.
By being mindful of clarity, efficiency, and integrity, we can all become more effective communicators.
This has been fantastic. Thanks for guiding me through the world of information design.
My pleasure.
Any final words of wisdom for our listener before we wrap up?
Remember, the world is full of fascinating data just waiting to be visualized in new and insightful ways. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep designing.
Great advice. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been truly enlightening.